If you were born in the 1970s, I want you to do something before you scroll away. I want you to put your hand flat against your own chest. Not for a feeling, just to remind yourself that you're still here. That after everything you've carried every season you weren't sure you'd survive, the heart under that hand is still beating. Because I believe you didn't land on this video by accident, and I believe the reason has everything to do with the decade that made you. There's a particular kind of person who came up in the 70s. You learned to read a room before you learned to read a book. You knew when the air in the house changed, when to be invisible, when to be loud, when to disappear into the backyard until the storm passed inside. You grew up with a key around your neck and an empty house waiting after school. And somewhere in those long, quiet afternoons, you developed something most people never develop at all. You learned to be alone with yourself. And you learned to listen to things nobody was saying out loud. I want to talk to you today about why that matters. Why the way your mind was shaped not by accident, but by the hand of God working through the exact circumstances of your childhood is the very thing heaven is calling on right now. But I'm not going to give you theories. I'm going to tell you the truth, the way I've lived it. So stay with me. My name is George, and I've spent most of my adult life sitting with people in the moments they thought nobody would ever understand. The ones who feel like they were born, tuned to a different frequency than everyone around them. And over, I've noticed something. So many of them came from that same window of time. That same strange, in-between decade. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think God was building something. Let me start with a memory. Not a Bible verse yet, we'll get there. A memory. I was maybe 8 years old, sitting on the floor in front of a television set with a knob you had to turn. And only a few channels came in clear. The rest were static, and I remember turning that knob slowly, listening, waiting for the picture to resolve out of the snow. You had to be patient. You had to have an ear for it, that exact spot where the noise turned into something real. And I think about that now, all these years later, because that's exactly what your childhood trained you to do. To sit in the static. To wait for the signal, to trust that something real was hiding inside all that noise, even when everybody else had given up and walked away. Think about that for a second. The children of that era weren't handed answers. There was no screen in your pocket telling you what to think. When you had a question at 2 in the morning, you lay there with it. When you were afraid, nobody narrated your feelings back to you, or gave you a word for them. You had to find the word yourself. You had to sit in the dark of your own room and make meaning out of silence. And here's what most people miss. That isn't damage. I know it felt like damage. I know some of you are sitting there right now thinking about a childhood that was lonelier than it should have been. A house that was colder than a house should be. A parent who was there in body and gone in every other way. I'm not going to pretend that didn't hurt. It did. But I want to tell you what I've come to believe with everything in me. God doesn't waste a single ounce of what you went through. He took the loneliness, and He forged an instrument out of it. He took the silence, and He tuned your ear to hear Him in it. There's a man in the scriptures I keep coming back to, and I want you to meet him the way I've come to know him, not as a stained glass figure, but as a tired, frightened human being. His name was Elijah, and by the time we find him in the 19th chapter of 1 Kings, he is finished. Not metaphorically. Done. He had just stood on a mountain and seen God move with fire, the greatest victory of his entire life. And then a threat came against him, and something inside him simply broke. He ran into the wilderness, sat down under a small tree, and asked God to let him die. "I've had enough," he said. take my life. I'm no better than anyone who came before me. I want you to sit with that picture, because I think some of you know that tree. You've been under it. You did the thing. You won the fight. You held the family together. You got the kids raised. You kept the faith through years that should have broken you, and then, right after the victory, out of nowhere, came the crash, the exhaustion that doesn't make sense to anybody looking from the outside. They see what you accomplished. They don't see you sitting under the tree at the edge of your own strength, wondering quietly if it would be easier to just stop. And what did God do with a worn-out prophet who wanted to die? He didn't lecture him. He let him sleep. He sent food. He let him rest until the man could stand again. And then he told him to go to the mountain, because he was about to pass by. So Elijah went and stood at the mouth of a cave. And a great wind came, strong enough to tear the mountains apart, but God wasn't in the wind. Then an earthquake, but God wasn't in the earthquake. Then a fire, but God wasn't in the fire. And after all of it, after all the noise and the spectacle, there came a sound. The old translations call it a still small voice, a gentle whisper, a thin silence with something living inside it. Now here's why I told you about the television first. Elijah heard God in the one place most people would never think to listen. Not in the disaster, not in the explosion, in the whisper. And do you know who hears whispers? People who learned, somewhere a long time ago, how to be quiet enough to catch them. People who sat in the static as children and learned the patience it takes to wait for the signal to come through. The very thing your childhood taught you to listen in the silence, to find meaning where others heard only noise, is the exact ability it takes to hear the voice of God. That's not an accident of your personality. That's a calling that was being installed in you before you ever had the words for it. Let me tell you about a woman I knew. I'll keep her anonymous, because she'd want it that way, but I'll never forget her. She came up in the same era we're talking about. Latchkey kid. The whole thing house empty when she got home. A mother working 2 jobs. A father who left when she was small. And she told me once, sitting across from me with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, that for most of her life she thought there was something wrong with her. She felt too much. She picked up on things other people walked right past. She'd walk into a gathering, and within 30 seconds, she could feel the tension between 2 people who were smiling and pretending everything was fine. She thought it made her broken. Oversensitive, they'd called her. Too intense. And one day, late in her life, it finally clicked for her. She wasn't broken. She was built. That sensitivity she'd been apologizing for since she was a little girl was the very thing that let her sit with dying people and bring them peace. The thing that let her know when her own grown children were hurting before they said a word. The thing that made her, in her own quiet and unnoticed way, one of the most spiritually awake people I have ever met. The wound and the gift were the same thing. They always are. The empty house that taught her to read silence also taught her to hear God. Let me put you inside a moment, because I think you'll know it the second I describe it. You're standing in a kitchen at a family gathering. The good plates are out. Everyone's laughing at something, and you're laughing too, your hand around a paper cup, nodding along. But underneath it, you're picking up everything. You can feel the sister who's been crying in the bathroom and came back with her face fixed. You can feel the marriage at the far end of the table that's 3 sentences away from an argument they'll save for the car ride home. You catch the brother forcing his laugh a half second too long. Nobody else in that room seems to notice any of it. They're just having dinner. And you're standing there, fully present and completely separate at the same time. wondering why you always end up being the one who sees behind the curtain. You learned to do that young, in a house where the weather could change without warning. Reading the room wasn't a personality trait, it was survival. You had to know, before anyone said a word, whether tonight was going to be safe, or whether you needed to get small and quiet. And that radar never turned off. It came with you into adulthood, into every relationship, into every room you've ever walked into since. For most of your life, you probably thought it was a curse. I'm telling you, it was a gift sharpened on a hard stone. The same eyes that learned to watch a difficult house for danger are the eyes that can now see straight into a hurting person and know exactly what they need. God doesn't develop discernment like that in comfortable people. He develops it in the ones who had to pay attention. I see it in so many of you. You feel like you've spent your whole life as a stranger, in your own family, your own town, your own skin. You've wondered why you can't just be content with the things that seem to satisfy everyone else. Why there's always been this ache in you, this sense that you were made for something you can't quite name, this restlessness that doesn't go away no matter how good things get. I want to tell you gently that ache is not your enemy. That ache is the homing signal. It's the part of you that knows it doesn't fully belong here, because it was made for somewhere else. There's a message that passes through your eyes, and there is a message that passes through your spirit. If something in you has been recognizing itself while you listen to me, don't dismiss it. That is the Spirit confirming what was already written. I put together something called the Secret Protocol for exactly this reason. It carries 7 keys that unveil what heaven deposited in you before you ever arrive, the things no one around you has ever been able to name, the reasons you've always felt set apart. It comes with the full audiobook, so you can carry it into your own moments of prayer and silence and encounter with God. And you also receive the Awakening Map, the guide that illuminates the 5 seasons of spiritual awakening, so you can see, with real clarity, exactly where you are right now and what comes next. You can reach it through the QR code on your screen or through the link pinned in the first comment, but only for a limited time. Don't let this moment pass without a response. Because here's the thing I most want you to understand. The way you were shaped was never random. Let me go back to that decade for a moment, because I want to be honest about what it actually felt like, not romantic about it. You came up in a world that was coming apart at the seams in 100 quiet ways. Marriages that had looked permanent were dissolving. The certainties your parents grew up with were cracking. And a lot of you absorbed instability the way a sponge absorbs water, silently, completely, without anyone noticing how full you were getting. You became the steady one, the responsible one, the kid who didn't cause problems, because you'd already learned that the household had no room for your problems. You parented yourself. In some cases, you parented everybody. And do you know what that does to a soul? It can break it. I won't lie to you about that. Some people came out of those houses and never recovered. And if that's closer to your story than you'd like to admit, I'm not here to shame you for the ways you coped. But for others, and I believe, if you're still listening to me right now, you're one of them. It produced something rare. A depth. A capacity to hold weight. A spiritual maturity that came too early and cost too much, but is now, in this season of your life, the very thing God is reaching for. There's another figure I want to bring in, and this one stayed hidden for years before anyone understood what he was for. His name was Joseph. You probably know the colorful coat and the dreams, but I want you to think about the prison, because that's the part most people skip over. Here was a young man who'd been given dreams of a future so large his own family couldn't stomach it. They threw him in a pit, sold him off, and through no fault of his own, he ended up forgotten in an Egyptian prison, year after year after year, with no sign that any of those dreams would ever come to anything. Now imagine being him. Imagine knowing, deep in your bones, that you were made for something and watching the years pile up while nothing happens. Imagine the bitterness that could have grown in that cell. The temptation to decide that the dreams were a cruel joke, that you'd been a fool to believe you were special, that the whole thing was your own arrogance coming back to mock you. I think a lot of you have done time in a prison like that. Not a literal one. The prison of a life that looked, from the outside, like it was going nowhere. The years where you knew you carried something but no door would open, and no one would see it. But here's what the prison was actually doing. It was forming him. It was taking a proud boy who flaunted his dreams and turning him into a man who could be trusted with the power those dreams pointed to. By the time Joseph walked out of that cell and stood before Pharaoh, he was no longer the kid who needed everyone to recognize his specialness. He was a man who'd been so thoroughly hidden and humbled that he could hold authority without it corrupting him. The waiting wasn't punishment. The waiting was preparation. And when the moment finally came, he was ready, and not a single day of those forgotten years had been wasted. I tell you that because I think some of you are right at the edge of your own moment, and you've nearly given up on the wait. You've decided the dream was childish. You've made peace with smallness because the disappointment of hoping got too heavy to keep carrying. And I want to be the voice that says, don't close that door yet. The years you thought were empty were never empty. They were the prison that was making you ready. Everything you learned in the silence, everything you developed in the loneliness, every drop of depth you earned the hard way, it's all about to be needed. Now let me say something to those of you who are tired. Not tired in the way you can fix with a good night's sleep. Tired in your spirit. The tiredness of having held it together for so many people, for so long, that you've forgotten what it feels like to be held yourself. I sat in a parking lot once, years ago, in the dead middle of the night. It was a hospital parking lot, and I'd been inside for hours with someone I loved who was slipping away, and I came out to my car, and I just couldn't drive. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, and the engine off, and the windows fogging up, and I had nothing left. Not even words for a prayer. I'd been the strong one for everybody inside that building all night, and out there alone in the dark, the strength just ran out. And I remember saying out loud, to a God I wasn't sure was listening, I don't have anything left. You're going to have to carry this. Because I can't. And nothing dramatic happened. No light. No voice. But I felt something settle over me in that car. A quiet. The same quiet I'd learned to find as a kid in an empty house. And I understood, sitting there, that the silence wasn't God being absent. The silence was God being close in the only way I could actually receive him right then. He was in the whisper. He was in the thin, quiet, under all my exhaustion. And the reason I could feel him there, the reason I knew how to be still enough to notice, was everything the lonely parts of my own childhood had taught me without my ever knowing they were teaching me anything at all. That's what I want you to take from all of this. The parts of your story you've resented the most might be the parts that made you able to find God where most people never even think to look. The scriptures tell us that God's strength is made perfect in weakness. Not in spite of your weakness in it. Through it. The very places where you feel most fragile, most strange, most like you don't fit. Those are the places the power runs strongest. The empty house. The early responsibility. The sensitivity they told you to toughen up out of. The ache that never let you settle. None of it was the accident you thought it was. All of it was the shaping of an instrument God intends to play in a season that I believe is opening right now. Let me give you one more picture, and this one is short, but I think it's the one you'll carry out of here. There's a woman in the Gospels who had spent 12 years sick, bleeding, isolated, untouchable by the rules of her own community. 12 years of being on the outside of everything. And when Jesus came through her town in a crushing crowd, she didn't ask for an audience. She didn't make a scene. She just reasoned, quietly, in the privacy of her own desperate heart, that if she could only get close enough to touch the edge of his clothing, it would be enough. And she pressed through the crowd, and she reached out, and she touched the hem of his garment. And he stopped. In the middle of a crowd pulling at him from every direction. He stopped, because he felt that one quiet touch out of all of them. He felt the difference between the people pressing against him by accident and the one person reaching out on purpose. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You don't have to be the loudest one in the room. You never were. You're the one who learned, a long time ago, how to reach out quietly and on purpose. How to press through the noise toward the one thing that's real. That's not a weakness. In the economy of heaven, that's exactly the thing that gets noticed. The quiet reach gets the answer the loud demand never gets. There's one more man I have to bring to you, because his story might be the closest of all to what you've lived. His name was Gideon, and when God found him, he was hiding. The book of Judges tells us he was down in a winepress, beating out wheat in secret, because enemies were raiding the land, and he was trying to keep what little his family had from being taken. Picture that. A young man crouched down in a pit meant for crushing grapes, doing his work in hiding, scared and small and convinced he was nobody. And an angel of the Lord came and sat down near him and said the most absurd thing imaginable. The Lord is with you, mighty warrior, to a man hiding in a hole. And Gideon basically said what every one of us has thought at the lowest point. If God is with us, then where is he? Why has all this happened? Why do I feel so abandoned? And then he pointed at himself and listed all the reasons he was the wrong choice. My family is the weakest. I'm the least important one in it. You've got the wrong man. He couldn't see what God saw. He looked at himself and saw a frightened nobody in a winepress. God looked at the same man and saw the deliverer of an entire nation. I think that gap between how you see yourself and how God sees you is the whole reason you needed the childhood you had. Because if life had handed you everything easily, you'd be standing in the open congratulating yourself. Instead, you learned to work in the winepress, in the hidden place, expecting nothing, hardened against hope. And that's exactly where God likes to show up. Not to the ones who already think they're mighty. To the ones hiding in the pit, doing the quiet work. Sure, they've been forgotten. He calls you by the name of what you're going to become, not the name of where he found you. He called a man in a hole a mighty warrior. And then he made it true. So if you came up in that strange decade, in those empty afternoons, in those houses where you learned to listen, because nobody was talking to you, I want you to stop carrying it as a wound and start carrying it as a calling. You were not shaped differently by accident. You were shaped for a purpose. You are only now old enough and seasoned enough and quiet enough to step into. And I'll leave you with this, because I want you to do it for me, not just think it. Somewhere in everything I've said, there was one moment that landed harder than the rest. Maybe it was the boy in front of the static television. Maybe it was the woman with the cold coffee, who finally understood she wasn't broken. Maybe it was Joseph in the cell, or Elijah under the tree, or me in that parking lot with my hands on the wheel and nothing left to give. One of those reached into your own life, and touched something specific. I want you to go to the comments and tell me which one, and tell me the moment in your own life it reminded you of. Not in general, the specific one. The afternoon, the room, the night you sat in the static and learned to listen. Because I read those. And there is something powerful that happens when one of us finally says the quiet thing out loud, and another one of us reads it and realizes we were never as alone as we believed. So tell me your moment. I'll be down there waiting to hear it.